few years ago, I walked into a retro game store with a desire to start building my own physical collection. And there, I saw two GameCube games for $60 each that were near the top of my priorities list, only having enough money for one. The one I ended up buying was Tales of Symphonia. Of course it was. This was during my Tales high, it was already one of my favorite entries, and I wanted the physical edition that ran at 60 frames as opposed to the one I had, which ran at 30. A good purchase, all things considered, because the price for it has unsurprisingly gone up since. And you know, despite many hardships resulting in me needing to get rid of a few personal valuables, I still own that copy, with it being very near and dear to my heart. I really couldn't have gone wrong either way. That said, years later and a few months ago at the time of writing this video, I went back to that same game store and found the other option now listed at around $200. Needless to say, I did not pick it up, and upon leaving the store empty-handed, all I could think was one thing. Young Zafer, you really screwed up. On October 5th, 2000 in Japan, and November 13th that same year in North America, we were graced with the Dreamcast game to end all Dreamcast games. The console isn't particularly known for its JRPGs, but out of all of them, one clearly stands above the rest. I mean, it says Skies right there on the front cover. Can we get much higher? Of course not. Know your place. You're in the presence of Skies of Arcadia, the product of a team consisting of developers from Team Andromeda of Panzer Dragoon fame, key staff members from the Phantasy Star series, Shuntaro Tanaka, who had written the stories for Sakura Wars 1 and 2 to assist with the scenario writing here, Yutaka Minobe and Tatsuyuki Maeda on the soundtrack, both known for their work on other Sega IPs like Sonic, Knights, and Space Channel 5 to name a few, along with the legend Rieko Kodama to produce it all. What a stellar lineup. I'm telling you guys, Overworks is one of the best things to happen to the company, and this game was all the proof you needed. Development started on the Saturn, but eventually moved to the Dreamcast, which ended up being the right call due to the more powerful hardware and it just being easier to work with in general. As a result, development went smoothly, and while the localization proved to be much more difficult, we all eventually got the game on Sega's last console. A console that, unfortunately, was a failure, so I'm happy to report that Skies of Arcadia was one of the titles to jump ship and find a new home on other platforms. Although in this game's case, plural is just straight up lying. We're all well aware that the only re-release this game ever got was on the GameCube, going under the name Skies of Arcadia Legends, the supposed director's cut, including all of the Dreamcast DLC content and general quality of life improvements for fans and newcomers alike to enjoy. The same version that eluded me all of those years ago. Of course, given that we're here today, I obviously played it at some point, specifically this version, but given that I still don't own a physical copy, you can piece two and two together. Don't try and guilt trip me or shake that head. I waited. I gave Sega plenty of time to re-release this in any way, shape, or form, but I can only be a patient fanboy for so long, especially with a game as unanimously praised as this. It's one of the best RPGs ever. This is the swan song of the Dreamcast. Sega's never topped this, blah, blah, blah. How do you expect anyone to hear all of that and not come up with creative ways to play this game? Much like Sakura Wars, this has been a gaming bucket list item of mine for a while, being on set list even longer than that game. I wish I could pinpoint the exact moment I started hearing about it, but it's been hyped up for me for so long now that I can't even remember. Regardless, seeing the crazy amount of love from fans and getting a glimpse at what the game was all about with Vice's inclusion in All-Stars Racing Transformed, I don't know why I waited for so long, but I eventually played the game in 2022. Managed to dodge any and all spoilers at that. I went into this game 100% blind. What a concept! And after beating it for myself, was this an amazing game after all? Or did it fail to live up to all of the hype, proving once again that going into games with lofty expectations is a bad idea? To be perfectly honest with y'all, it's quite the opposite. The hype failed to live up to it, because this game, it's a special kind of greatness. One that needs a detail-oriented review script for even an attempt at capturing its beauty to be up to par. I had to really chew on this one before talking about it at length, and after some time, I think I'm finally ready to put into words why this game failed to escape my brain well after my playthrough wrapped up. Care to join me for the ride? I hope so, because in this game, the skies aren't the limit, they're just the beginning. Grab yourself some water and get excited. We aren't just talking about any game, but in my very humble opinion, Sega's Magnum Opus. This is Skies of Arcadia. The 6th generation. I have such a soft spot for this era, not only because it was one I spent a lot of my earlier years playing, but even in retrospect, it's so endearing. While Generation 5 was when 3D gaming was starting to become the norm, Generation 6 was 3D gaming's awkward teen years, a time where models were trying to become a bit more refined, a bit more realistic. That last part taken a little too seriously by a couple of games. Crazy that a black man got tired of seeing the color brown, but those games that went for a more stylized art direction proved to be timeless. Skies of Arcadia, unsurprisingly, is no exception. It's kind of funny though, both the original and this definitive edition came out in the same generation, acting as further proof that Sega was too ahead of the game for their own good, and you all messed up for not buying and appreciating the Dreamcast for all it did. Yes, I am blaming you, which on that note, what's so special about a disc drive anyway? What, are you all too good to buy a game console for video games? I mean, I don't even... What was I talking about? It was certainly an impressive piece of hardware, with this later release pushing it past its limits. As a result, not a lot was changed when moving it to the GameCube, and for good reason. Minding my up-res footage, colors are bold, models have detail whether you're battling or not, and locations feel as large as they are alive. You constantly see the many people of the world going about their days with cute animations and fun things to say, making them all feel important and more like real people. And when you know it, a bunch of them even have names. Speaking of those characters, one of the major goals during development was to go for an anime aesthetic for the sake of a broader range of emotions. Early 3D RPGs weren't particularly known for their expressive characters, so an attempt at rectifying that as a showcase for the game's graphical prowess was a genius move and a roaring success at that. It's not even just their facial expressions, but the way they all move and interact with one another. You can tell me that Vice and Nika have been partners for a while all you want, but showing me their coordinated handshake and how happy they are to see each other when apart is a whole other thing. Fina starting out closed off only to start smiling more with an open posture as the adventure continues does wonders for her character. Look at this doofus all seasick. I love him. I love the charm. It's off the charts. But more than anything, I love how this competent animation goes triple for the battle system. Attacks have that wind up and impact they need, with the special attacks, even today, being the most badass spectacles imaginable. Older 3D RPGs were all about those fancy attack animations, but they all need to bow down to this. Yeah, it's that kind of game, people. Your party and major bosses never fail to disappoint in this aspect, with the only downside being that you can't skip the enemy's special animations. A bit of an oversight, especially considering you can skip your own, but hey, I could be forced to look at worse things. Hell, even before getting the 3D modeling treatment, this game was bound to look great thanks to a super sexy art direction. Since we're already talking about the characters in regards to their technical feats, let's talk about how sizzling these designs are. Youch! My boy Vice is stunting on this group, and look at Aika's dumb hair. It's amazing! Everyone is designed in a way that perfectly fits their personality and role within the story, all of which feeling believable alongside one another. Fina's outfit stands out because she comes from a faraway land and is an outlier compared to everyone else, but she still fits within the grand scheme of things. I never got the vibe that she came from a separate game or something. The evil commanders' designs all give off the proper impression of their political standing. The families of the sky pirates all have more worn out homemade clothes and rugged looks. Just a glance at each character is enough to tell their story, to bring across what they're about and where they come from. It's brilliant, and as for the world itself, it's breathtaking. Full exploration could very easily be justified by the simple desire to see it all for its own sake. An endless sea of clouds beckons the call for adventurers, and upon diving in, you're greeted by a treasure trove of distinct iconic locations. The town design in this game is unmatched, housing so much diversity in regards to their layout, culture, lifestyles, and general vibes. There was so much variety that any one region could be the sole setting of an entire game, but they're all part of a larger world, all of which you get to explore, all of which the game begs you to explore. And if just the general satisfaction earned from finding all of this yourself isn't enough, then I'll have to get back to you on the additional ways this game rewards curiosity later on. Beautiful world, beautiful cast, beautiful game. Something my eyes and ears can agree with. This game doesn't have full voice acting, but it does have its fair share of voice clips.
Yay!
I love them. Everyone has such a cheesy, exaggerated voice, and I love them. I would have killed for a bad dub to completely voice this game over, but perhaps the lack of one was for the best. I'll just imagine it myself, and if anything, it gives the player more opportunities to listen to this soundtrack, which is unreal. Despite that not being immediately apparent with the Legends version. The soundtrack was actually ported incorrectly to the GameCube, which resulted in everything sounding just the slightest bit off. A real shame, because when listening to the game's music on its own or the Dreamcast version, it's ear porn. Here it's slightly less ear porn, not at all as bad as some make it out to be, but listening to the actual music versus how it sounds in the Legends re-release, there's definitely a difference. It's really the only downside with this version, and because it's not all that bad, not to mention there are plenty of other ways to enjoy the music at that, I'm gonna choose to let it slide and proceed to praise the audible extravaganza we have here. I'm talking about an OST so good that not even improper porting can ruin it. Pure orchestrated goodness, and as melodic as it is euphoric. Emotions were felt on such a large scale, and I remembered it all. That opening got me so excited to dive in, becoming one of those intros I genuinely never wanted to skip. Then immediately following that, as if made with the sole purpose of getting me completely in the zone, was the magical main theme. sounds like a film score. Studio Ghibli's Castle in the Sky immediately came to mind. Actually, on that note, there were a few instances in this game that reminded me of that movie, but I suppose that's a whole other topic. Anyway, not trying to hold film scores on a higher pedestal than video game soundtracks or whatever, I'm just at a loss for words. The Skies of Arcadia OST is one of the best parts of the entire package, and this may have been the fastest iTunes purchase I've made in my life. To go alongside the diversity of these locations from a visual standpoint, the music matches the environments, setting the stage for a wild amount of instrumental variety. The scope of this game's discography is incredible, and not a single track feels out of place. Every time I went somewhere new, I was excited to hear another bop, with that feeling never being met with disappointment. In fact, the only disappointing part is when you leave an area, because this game rarely reuses music. It's cruel. As a matter of fact, the song you're hearing right now only plays one time. Oh yeah, let's go ahead and give this dungeon the dreamiest, most ethereal soundscape imaginable, and then proceed to never use it again. I know there's such thing as too much of a good thing, but can I get a little bit of a good thing? I mean, damn. Especially because even the songs that do get reused are done in such fitting ways. The battle themes never got old, and whenever I was storming enemy grounds, I was always greeted by the intense evil territory theme. All of this is great already, but as if the composers weren't satisfied with simple greatness, they decided to make the OST dynamic in many instances. I remember earlier Sega RPGs attempting the same, but none got it right like this game, with the two biggest cases being the overworld and the boss themes. Depending on where you are on the world map, the song stays the same, but the instruments change in order to more accurately reflect the location. Such a subtle game-changing detail that almost goes unnoticed due to how natural it is. As for the boss theme, you'd be lying if you told me you didn't notice it. It starts off fairly standard, emphasizing the opposing force through the intensity of the drums and strings. When you're on the ropes, which will no doubt happen, things will get even more intense as you and your character struggle to hang on. But when you finally get the upper hand and turn the tables in your favor, that feeling is punctuated by symphonic excellence. Oh, it's so satisfying. And look at all these factors already seeming to heighten the gameplay. This really is a Sega RPG, huh? Is it a good RPG though? Well, yeah, but humor me. Becoming a good RPG requires to have a well-told and fun story to follow. So let's see to what extent this game reaches those standards. After all, what even are the Tales of Arcadia? Our story begins right in the thick of action. A mysterious girl, whose name we're gonna just pretend I didn't already say, seems to be getting chased by one of the leaders in the Valuan Empire, an evil, powerful group bent on conquering all territories with an iron fist, which the people of the world aren't okay with. Back in the world's earlier times, everyone was all about exploring and discovering new lands, with that adventurous spirit being kept alive by the many sky pirates, some of which being no good troublemaking rascals, but most of which going for more of a Robin Hood approach. These are who we refer to as the Blue Rogues, sticking it to the malicious empire, giving back to those in need, and sailing the seven skies just for the hell of it. These guys are so cool and don't waste any time getting down to business. In fact, it's right when the Valuan group captures the girl that they get raided by the pirates, with my boy Vice and his partner in crime Aika kicking ass not even 10 minutes in. The ship is successfully raided and the girl, revealed to be named Fina, is saved. She's on a mission to secure the world's moon crystals in order to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands, aka the Valuan Empire, who, surprise surprise, also wants the crystals. A great excuse for the duo to go out into the world and explore on their own terms, while simultaneously flicking off the Empire. Why wouldn't they help her? The three set off on their quest, and aside from some other events setting up the game as a whole, that's really it. A very simple goal and premise, all things considered, which isn't a bad thing in the slightest. One of the many frustrations regarding modern gaming is this strange obsession with innovation. You can't have too many characters going through the same arc, stories aren't allowed to hit the same narrative beats, and we can't be exploring the same locations, or something. It's to the point where the word derivative seems to have a negative connotation, and forgive me for not understanding because I don't. Skies of Arcadia, for lack of a better phrase, plays it very safe. If you're well acquainted in RPG hell, then I can't say there's a lot here that'll surprise you. You've probably played plenty of games where you took down an evil empire. You've traveled dozens of worlds in search of different colored MacGuffins. Hell, you may have even partaken in Robin Hood-esque shenanigans. So if you're looking for something different, you're gonna want to look elsewhere, because Skies of Arcadia isn't trying to break the mold or be innovative for innovation's sake. It's more concerned with simply telling a good story, regardless of it not being all that unique in its approach. And as a result, it doesn't just tell a good story, it tells a great one. It's all about the journey with this game, the people you meet, places you go, lives you impact, and sights you see, all of which are allowed to be emphasized because of that simple premise. The joys of exploration are infectious, as you'll find yourself enraptured with the variety of locations and the people who are a part of them, getting caught up in their stories, doing the legwork to find the crystal's locations, then having Valua become tangled in the mix. It's a formula for success that feels anything but formulaic. I thought there was going to be a clear pattern after that first little arc in Nazir. Hit the town, find the dungeon, fight the Empire, and get the crystal, right? Wrong! This game isn't shy to throw curveballs at you left and right to the point where there's no discernible pattern. You're bound to get caught off guard by different characters or obstacles, which makes for a wild ride without any dull moments. Naturally, the pacing in this game is great, with the whole experience lasting about 30 hours or so. A sweet spot where the game isn't so needlessly long, but meaty enough to do its thing and as throwaway as it wants. There was always something that the group was doing, and I never felt like things were padding or that the story was running low on fuel. In fact, if this story's anything, it's energetic. Lots of good vibes all around, as low points for the characters and the narrative as a whole tended not to last for too long. As a result, it was all incredibly effective when these moments did pop up, since their juxtaposition with the uplifting nature made them all the more impactful. But for the most part, we've got ourselves a swashbuckling story that's a blast to follow. If not for the plot itself or the world it takes place in, then for the roster. What an awesome group we have here. And a big reason as to why they're so awesome is their cheery nature. They're all so likable and kind to one another, with occasional disagreements every now and then, but nothing too drama-centric. Something that can potentially lead to boredom. Conflict does get the narrative ball rolling, but in this game's case, the lack of tension between party members instead acts as a showcase for solid writing and characterization. We don't get glimpses of their depth through arguments or dramatic trauma dumps, but rather through sincere conversations and heart-to-hearts. It was all very lovely and feel good, which tended to make me feel good. Crazy! Let's talk about our main group for some prime examples. Vice, Ica, and Fina. Vice is the leader of this band of pirates, and he certainly earns his role. He's a really likable guy, with his arc, per se, being about his journey to become a noteworthy pirate. You'll watch as he helps tons of lesser characters get out of slumps and find a passion for going out into the world, meaning right out the gate he's worth getting invested in. At the same time, he's still a kid, and this acts as a way to showcase the typical coming-of-age plotline, but with a bit of a scurvy spin to it, if you catch my drift. So I guess there are some surprises to be had with this story. What do you know? Ica is more of a static character, acting as a rock for the group and somewhat of an advisor to Vice, but I'll be damned if she wasn't endlessly irresistible. I love this girl and how much agency she takes when the situation calls for it. She's sure to carry her weight and never fails to have a positive attitude. And then there's Fina, who, unlike the other two, doesn't start off as a pirate. No, she's kind of this game's fish out of water, but very quickly fits into the group in her own way. Learning more about her was a treat, and because of her unfamiliarity with the life of a sky pirate and the places even these two have been, she somewhat fills the role of the player's surrogate, and I love her too. How much she gets along with these two goobers, the way she learns to appreciate the world and its people. Man, these three alone could have carried the cast if needed. Good thing too, because this game harkens back to Phantasy Star 4 by having a core group with other potential party members hopping in and out based on the whims of the story, and this time it's even stricter. We only get a max of 4 party members this time as opposed to 5, and most of the time you'll be sticking with the 3 you see on the front cover, the Dreamcast cover that is. Just as I felt in Phantasy Star 4, I really enjoyed this. Having a main group to become invested in with another to round out the dynamic in their own unique ways never failed to make for such a great blend of personalities, and it helped to make those character stories more believable since we didn't always have to bend over backwards in order to justify them staying with the group. Not to say that it's a bad thing when games do that, I just think that this approach is better. It's always good to have the story's twists and turns impact the player's gameplay experience, with this being a textbook reliable example of that done well. Those characters that fill the 4th slot, by the way, oh, they're great. I don't want to give too much away, but I will say that the 3rd guy to come in was a strong contender for my favorite character in the game. Don't ask me who that is, by the way, I just can't pick from the core trio. Let's just say they're all my favorite, okay? This game just has outstanding writing, okay? Get off my back. You bet your ass that next level writing extends to the villains too. There are a bunch of them, yet for some reason, I can't seem to find the weak link. Almost like there isn't one to be found. No way. Actually, yes way, and the game knows it too. They're each given a name card upon introduction, and their distinct personalities constantly steal the show whenever they pop up on screen. I remembered all of them and was especially satisfied with how their individual stories developed and concluded. The two main villains in particular, they were so good. I'm not gonna say their names, whether people who played this game consider that a spoiler or not, because just seeing them rise up the ranks and begin to have a larger presence is a part of their appeal. Just know that the two of them did not disappoint and were a huge part as to why this story was so kick-ass. In fact, it seems as though I've been nothing but positive, huh? I mean, what can I say? The story knows what it wants to do and does it well, which is exactly what I mean when I say that a story being derivative doesn't automatically make it bad. As we've discussed, the tale excels on all fronts, so who cares if it's not totally unique? When it's this good, does that really matter? Does the fact that you've seen other games do the same things done here really drag it all down that much? I don't think so, and I don't think anyone else should either. Although, I'm sure some of you have your doubts. There is no way the story's actually this perfect, right? I should probably talk about the lulls as well, considering this is a review, and you know what? Fair point. The cons deserve to be acknowledged just as much as the pros. I won't try to ignore them any longer. Let's go ahead and talk about what the story does wrong. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's dive into the gameplay. It's become excruciatingly apparent that this game puts a hell of an emphasis on exploration, with much of the gameplay being in service of just that. So naturally, it's only fair to start off with the many elements surrounding that. After all, is the world fulfilling the travel through on a level design standpoint? Is the map space utilized well? And are you rewarded to a satiating degree, making it all worth it in the first place? Yes, yes, and yes. For starters, I've gassed them up when talking about literally every aspect in this game, but the towns are so good from all angles. Naturally, they're fun to travel through as well, even if they don't have the most to do outside of shopping and talking to people, but that last part in and of itself ends up being a lot more important than you'd think. Remember how I mentioned that a lot of these townspeople have names? Well, when you get to the point in the game where you start to build a pirate crew of your own, it can consist of a bunch of the side characters you met doing their thing. That character who you swear seemed important, they probably are. Talk to them again and they'll most likely join your crew. Oh, you would not believe how much this adds. Suddenly, I was remembering all of the standout characters I met while just talking to everyone for its own sake. And by the time the game was nearing its final moments, I had formed myself a nice little posse with such diversity and distinct quirks. It's yet another way the game rewards the player for getting lost in the world, in a way that felt natural because I wasn't talking to these guys with any ulterior motives. I simply found joy in talking to as many NPCs as possible. It never became a matter of checking off boxes on a list of things needed for completion. I was simply enjoying another aspect of the game and happened to get rewarded for just that. Then when leaving towns, I had a whole sky to sail across on my airship. I love me some old school RPG overworlds, with this being no exception. And when you know it, there's a decent amount to do outside of going to the next location, with one of the most prominent aspects being discovery points. There are tons of landmarks you'll find and bits of the world that have gone unnoticed, but the game urging you to find them all and then report them back to the Sailors Guild to be rewarded handsomely. The faster you find these points, the more you'll be compensated for it, as there are other explorers out there doing the same thing, making for yet another mechanic that helps the world feel as alive as it is. But eventually you'll reach your destination, and if it's not a town or discovery point, then it's a dungeon, and I get all excited because the dungeons are banging in this game, being intricately designed with unique gimmicks, layouts, and even puzzles for you to solve. I've played a decent amount of RPGs, and while I don't think dungeons necessarily need puzzles in order to be anything of note, they sure are nice and a shortcut to becoming anything of note. I'd rather have them than not given the choice, with this game making a note to mix things up and not feature too many of the same kind of problems. It's wonderful, and there are tons of places to go at that, with the game rewarding you with chests or one of the many collectibles. Someone said collectibles being these little boogers hidden all over the world as part of a side quest that rewards you with items and in-game lore. Would you believe me if I told you that this was new? Yeah, it's a Legends exclusive and one that feels so naturally implemented into the full product. There's always something to find, with the game leaving it all for you to discover yourself. Sure, there are hints, but you can play the game perfectly fine without getting every little discovery or seeing literally all of the sights, which might not sound like much, but that respect towards the player and confidence in the fact that the player will want to seek out those things is a part of what keeps the adventurous spirit alive. At the risk of doing the game journalist thing, Skies of Arcadia makes you feel like a sky pirate, and that's so important to the philosophies this game wants to bring across, with bounties acting as further proof of this notion. There are a ton of optional fights to learn about through the Sailors Guild's wanted list, and hey, a few of these were added with the Legends update too. Tons to do in this game, with a good amount of them revolving around battles. Are those any good, by the way? Any good, he says. Listen, I don't care if this comes across as hyperbolic, but this is the kind of battle system that changes your perspective on what a turn-based game can look like. I tend to meme about hating turn-based combat, but if I could just lower the mask for a second, I have been consistently impressed by all of the takes, approaches, and styles that come with this RPG category. There are no doubt a decent amount of these more traditional games that play it very much straightforward, all of which in their own appealing ways, but they are so overshadowed by all the games that keep managing to concoct new ideas and innovate on preconceived notions for the genre. It's staggering, and I needed to point that out here not just because it's important to tell you all how I really feel, at least occasionally, but also because Skies of Arcadia is home to one of the best combat systems I've ever had the luxury of experiencing. Its only problem, a fairly substantial one at that, is its speed. Party members and enemies all move quick enough, but there's the slightest bit of dead space between every move that I could never ignore. I don't know if the game needs to load or something, but it adds up, and I wonder if something like this was inevitable. It didn't bother me that much in hindsight, but it's something worth noting, and an option to speed things up would have gone a long way. Anyway, that's all. The rest of it's kind of perfect, so let me just go ahead and get on my knees. Your options are for the most part pretty standard. Attack, magic, guard, items, or run away. You know, the usual fare. That said, we've already got something interesting within those typical options. Magic, to be specific, which is split into many categories based around this game's elements, with each element having different focuses on combat utility. Red has fire and attack buffing spells, green has poison and healing spells, silver has insta-kill and revives, so on and so forth. It's a lot to consider and something to consider at all, because you don't earn these spells in a linear progression. You instead set each character's weapon to a particular element, some working better on specific enemies than others, and on top of your typical experience and money gains after battle, you'll earn points towards the elements characters have equipped. Once a threshold is reached, you'll gain a new spell for the element in question, which is how you learn magic in this game, and where a lot of customization, party synergy, and planning all come into play. I loved building my characters towards specific roles as well as exploiting enemy weaknesses as I learned more about the elemental chart, all of which never became a necessity, by the way, since gunning for weaknesses isn't the deciding factor on which side is going to win. Even still, you can always switch a weapon's element whenever you want, and even in battle, you can hot swap between weapon elements at the push of a button on a character's turn, which, as you can see in my footage, was the exact moment I knew this game was going to be good. And just the act of learning these spells refuses to become grindy either, since on top of the points a party member gets for the element they themselves have equipped, you also get a little bit for the ones your other party members have on. I was worried at the start of the game that I wouldn't have as many spells as I'd like, but just partway through the game, I was more than satisfied with my pool and was excitedly learning all of these different spells I didn't think I'd ever have on certain characters. Magic is so cool in this game, and something about it that stuck out to me in particular was that all spells only cost 1 MP. I'll have to get back to you on that one, because we haven't even gotten to the best part yet. No, in order to do that, we have to take a look at the newer options. There are, of course, the special attacks, and you've already seen how cool those are, but on top of the visual spectacle they provide, they act as the major scale tippers for both you and the enemy. High damaging attacks, game-changing buffs, frustrating status ailments, a lot of that's here within this option, with spirit points being the resource needed to do any of this, those of which earned at the beginning of turns or by picking the focus option to charge that meter right up. No ifs, ands, or buts, SP is the clear star of the show. Specials and magic both primarily take from the shared gauge within the party, explaining why all spells only take 1 MP to use. And since SP is, like I just said, shared with the whole party, this makes it so that resource management and planning on how much a character takes from this limited amount is essential. You can't just spam the most powerful attacks over and over again. You have to delegate who does what and when, while adjusting to the whims of whoever's on the receiving end. SP items weren't too abundant either, which is great because the lack of any way to cheese this thoughtful limitation allows for the biggest source of challenge to be maintained. Strategizing when to save, charge, or splurge at SP, keeping the enemies at bay, and making an effort not to die all at the same time was the ultimate balancing act that made this combat system as good as it is. What made for that desired emphasis on my personal skill. It is wild how much this dumb little bar adds to the game, and I can't imagine it not being there. Boss battles in particular were really good with this, having the odds teeter in the favor of your party and the enemy over and over again. It's all pretty intense, and this is coming from someone who never set out to grind. I just gained the system and got good at what all the game was trying to teach me. I've actually heard this title be referred to as grindy, but it always felt wrong to me because, like I said, I never grinded. I participated in most of the battles as they came to me, did a few of the side quests, though not all, and explored a bit on my own. Just enjoying the game as I wanted resulted in me being up to par with the game's expectations, meaning on top of offering many ways to win with proper utility of the provided tools, I truly don't buy this notion that the game demands too much leveling up from the player. I only ever died a handful of times, with the majority of those deaths being at the hands of optional extra tough battles, especially the new girl in the the Legends version Piastel, whose third encounter I just couldn't beat, but you know, it's fine. Not like I wanted to know what was up with her anyway. I think the reality is, just like the Phantasy Star games that preceded this, the game's just a bit challenging, which I liked. Unlike those, however, particularly the older ones, you have more agency over how much you'll have to grind, if at all, so long as you take advantage of the game's mechanics. It really is a great combat system and would have been perfectly fine alone. Something I say at all because there's another form of combat, ship battles. I gotta be honest, I did not like these at all when they first popped up, but the more I played the game, the more I started to get them. They're very different for sure, and I believe that was the first major hurdle, as they're much slower paced and have you choosing 4 actions for the ship to do that entire round with the enemy ship doing the same. To be fair, in standard battles, you were also giving every character commands at the top of each round, but it felt a lot different there since you were having 4 characters do a move each versus 1 big unit doing 4. It doesn't really sound that different, but it feels more limiting, you know? All it takes is for this 1 unit to go down and that's it. Game over. But that said, the same technically applies for the enemy, right? And that's where it all starts to make sense. These are more methodical, strategic battles that encourage mind games. It's a lot better to take your time with these. Use the colored panels as hints to what the enemy has planned and strike when you have a clear opening. It takes some time to adjust to, but it'll happen. Hey, it happened to me, and I ended up getting really into them later on. There was one boss near the end of the game in particular that was so intense, and it was entirely within this battle system. But by that point, I was used to the shift and welcomed it all the same, with it being a high point in my overall experience. So while it may take some getting used to, this portion of the game deserves to be here, and that's a lot more than I was expecting. The SP mechanic is still the backbone of combat, arguably even more so here than on the ground. You're on equal footing with bosses, almost coming off as a duel of sorts, and because of how your ships are scaled, every single action feels that much more impactful. These are good, I'm glad to have come around on them. At first, I was ready to sit here and complain about them, but here I am, shouting to the heavens how great they are too. Go figure. Come to think of it, I didn't end up complaining about much of anything in this video. Sure, there was a little bump or two along the way, but things were relatively clean, and despite thinking about them for a bit once my playthrough was finished, I don't think I really cared about the game's flaws that much, if at all. I don't want to care, they don't matter. At the end of the day, it was never about the parts of this game on an individual basis. It was never about picking at the flaws that are probably there. Hell, it was never even about the act of critiquing. I'd be going about it all wrong, because really, it was about moments like this. Those moments where every ounce of the game comes together and washes over you to the point where you can't help but just stop and awe. Those moments where the game's many factors become so synchronized that its sheer majesty makes the act of becoming immersed feel like second nature. Those moments where it all connects and what Skies of Arcadia wants to be, how it wants you to feel, all just clicks. I'll be honest, this review was what I wanted to write for a while now, but I couldn't even comprehend my own emotions because the game kinda hurt my brain upon playing it. The whole became greater than the sum of its parts, meaning regardless of how much the positives and negatives balance each other out, it didn't matter to me. And I kept asking myself, is this right? Is this really how I feel? Because it feels like every facet of this game was good, but it wasn't. Was it? Why do I feel this way? What about this game isn't connecting? What was the game trying to do that it succeeded at, and I'm just not understanding? Something about it was slowly making every factor of the game I didn't enjoy into ones I came to appreciate over time. And I didn't know what that was. However, after giving myself the time to mull it all over, it hit me. I kept trying to look at this as a simple video game and nothing more, playing it at a time where I was knocking out a bunch of content as a matter of fact. But the reason it kept tugging at me and why it refused to leave my brain upon playing it is because Skies of Arcadia, as corny as this may sound, is more than just a simple video game. It's an experience, a moment, an adventure. Everything about it is in service of the pure, unadulterated adventure, with all the frustrating factors and moments of bliss that come with it. Any low point is immediately overshadowed by those horizon-expanding discoveries, the family found within your deck-swabbing crew, the hardships overcome with the rock-solid determination and perseverance of a sky pirate, along with the naturally developed love for the journey, making it all good. There is no bad, it's all good. Suddenly, you realize that everyone hypes up this game not because it's perfect or anything, but because nobody wants to critique it. And why would they? It's just a feel-good game that, yes, nails just about everything it's going for, but does it all with the intention of heightening the grand experience, and that's the important part. When that finally clicked in my brain, I didn't care about the flaws or the derivative nature of it all. Because it was enjoyable and because it was fun, I held onto that feeling and just had myself a good-ass time. Something I recommend you all do as well, because then we can have more games like Skies of Arcadia, a game that isn't trying to prove anything, outsmart the player, or be the next big thing. Rather, it's a game that just wants to immerse you in a great world, introduce you to a great band of personalities, punctuate it all with great fights, and above all, take you on a truly great adventure. And it's because of all this that the game in its own special way is perfect.